Greetings. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova and joined again by Anthony. Glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who's the intelligent designer and creator. For a change, I'm actually going to try to record a shorter segment. And this is to encourage creationists to argue things that they'll actually win. Creationists have a bad habit of trying to defend arguments that the evolutionists will start writing responses to. And that's not always a bad thing. But one thing I've noticed, the very best arguments, they're totally silent. And so I keep saying, why don't you use those arguments? Because the evolutionists have nothing to say. That's telling you you're winning the argument when they can't even say anything. And I know that. And I've thrown it in their face and they still don't know what to do with it. They just kind of change the subject. And topoisomerase is one of those. In the last segment that Anthony and I recorded, we talked about various things like ATP synthase and the flagellum. The evolutionists have fought us really hard on those. And I'm just like, the worst outcome for us was a draw. I think we've actually won that argument, but it wasn't quite, it wasn't like a blowout score of like 73-0. It was more like it was a game where we had a victory, but not by overwhelming margins. Areas where we have overwhelming margin is definitely the origin of life. That's why evolutionary propagandists will go out of their way to separate the theory of evolution from abiogenesis and pretend, oh, it's like someone else's problem. And I'm okay with compartmentalizing it, but you could see that they really, if you confront them and say, well, why don't we change the subject to abiogenesis? What do you think about design there? It's like, no, we are talking about evolution. I want you to realize there's a reason they try to compartmentalize things and avoid things. Because if you go to topics where they're definitely weak, they want to avoid that. They don't want to be seen where you're showing them up. Here is a case with the enzyme topoisomerase that, as far as I know, no one has really been able to give an evolutionary explanation for it. What one evolutionist did, and I actually like the guy's name, is Seigart. He was a professor at my graduate school, the NIH FAES graduate school. He was a non-Christian, then became a Christian, and then became what I consider a theistic evolutionist. My best understanding of his position is he actually does believe the origin of life was a miracle of God. But then after that, there's evolution. So I was in a debate with Dr. Gart, and I said, what about topoisomerase? He said, oh, that's a problem for origin of life. Like, okay, well, all right, let's just talk about topoisomerase then. Whether it's origin of life or not, to me, this looks like a miracle of God. Anthony, if you have any thoughts, and then we'll just try to get into it and be as efficient as possible.
No thoughts so far. I'm just waiting for the presentation. It'll hit me when we start doing that.
Okay, so topoisomerase is an enzyme that is a target of cancer chemotherapies. That's why it is one of the most studied enzymes. And what you have here depicted is the double helix of DNA. So DNA has two strands, and they're what they call complementary copies. Complementary bases is the proper term, not copies. They're bases. And so the cell has to use the DNA as a blueprint for proteins, and the proteins help form the machines and important structures and functions of life. So proteins are essential, but the manufacturing instructions are in the DNA for how to make the proteins. And in cancer chemotherapies, what they do is, if you can disrupt how DNA is, you can destroy the protein, which will then, if you destroy the proteins or its manufacture, you've destroyed the cell. So chemotherapy kills cells. Sadly, when you subject someone who has cancer to chemotherapy, the chemotherapy starts killing good cells. And so there are a lot of bad side effects. But this is kind of like a last resort. It's kind of like amputations. Like you're going to take a lot of the good with the bad. And it's a tough decision to make when you're going to subject someone to chemotherapy because it has such adverse effects on the body. So the way that we are able to indirectly damage the DNA is the DNA actually gets coiled up, and it gets into a state that it's not very usable. It gets tangled. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of why it gets tangled. I should have shown that. So maybe the next round, I'll show you how it gets tangled. But if anyone's been working with wires, it's just a nightmare to untangle things. If you're in a spacious room, you can, through a process of just kind of trying to untangle things, you have enough room to move things. In the crowded area of a cell, you don't have that luxury. So the way it does it is through cutting and then untangling, and I'll show you pictures of that. Anthony, do you have any questions here so far?
Not so far. I feel like you described it pretty well, and anything that the audience might be wondering about is going to be elucidated when you start to show how the cutting and untangling works with the rest of the presentation.
Great. So the solution is topoisomerase. Topoisomerase. There are actually two classes of topoisomerase. One, so this is just a conceptual rendering of DNA. And so let me see if I can get the slideshow going. So you have two classes of topoisomerase. One is topoisomerase 1, the other is topoisomerase 2. Topoisomerase 1, the way it untangles the DNA, and we'll illustrate that, is to just cut one of the strands. So it gets to the DNA, it's grabbing the blue strand, and then it's going to cut it like that. And you have to kind of imagine, unfortunately, the animation that I got this from doesn't have a good animation of how, like, the red strand is moved in a way, and then the blue strand is put on top of it. So let me just go backward a little bit if I can do that.
Are we supposed to be seeing something? Because nothing has come up on my screen. I don't know if the audience would be able to see it or not.
Oh, man, I totally botched that. Rewind. I'm so sorry. One of the problems is I can't always see what's on the StreamYard screen because I only have two monitors. All right, let's rewind. So where were we? Maybe I can edit this out. So we have topoisomerase 1. We have two classes of topoisomerase, 1 and 2. And you'll kind of figure out how we classify them. Topoisomerase 1, the way it untangles. Now look at this diagram. Do you see how the red stranded DNA is kind of over the blue strand? Do you see that there at this point right there?
Yes.
Okay. So topoisomerase 1 is going to cut the blue strand, and then it's going to reconnect it in a way that the blue strand is above the red strand. Let's see if it does that. Oh, see, it moves it around. It actually just loosened the knot, just one knot. I'm sorry.
Well, the reason it's doing this is to prevent supercoiling of the DNA, right?
Exactly. So I was remiss. We might have to redo this, but this is good practice for me so that I could be more accurate in the future. So we've already accomplished something. And people in the comments section just suggest how we might be able to improve the presentation next time. So you could see that it has alleviated one knot. And you can imagine then if you just repeat, you're going to alleviate all the knots. Now, DNA naturally coils, but sometimes you get too much coiling, and this is the way to relieve the stress. Now, if you don't do this, DNA will not be able to unwind and then therefore do all the cellular functions, because to be able to read the DNA as a blueprint to make proteins and make the cell work, you have to keep relieving these knots every now and then. And so if you're able to disrupt the action of the topoisomerase, the DNA is going to get all tangled up, and then basically it's not going to work, and the cell dies. Any questions? So that's topoisomerase 1. Good?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm assuming that you're going to explain what the difference is with topoisomerase 2, because that would be pretty much the only question I have.
Yep. Okay. So topoisomerase 2, it's just a little more complex. And it's called topoisomerase 2 partly because it cuts both strands to untangle. So let's watch it cut both strands. See there? The red and the blue strand were cut. And it's going to alleviate the supercoil like that. I mean, I wish the animation that I got this from was a little clearer, but you can kind of, if you can imagine this thing kind of going through the, going through the opening, it's going to go through the opening here, and then it's reconnected. They could have improved the animation, but basically it has to cut, and I call it the then untangle. So it cuts. So the first thing is it cuts, it untangles, and then reconnects. I'm going to see if I can improve the animation. They're not. There's one that uses clay to illustrate. I might use that next time because the clay was a little clearer. So how's this a problem for evolution? So there's several issues. First, it has to sense that it is tangled. If it doesn't locate the tangle, this is not going to work. Next, it has to be able to cut the DNA. So it has to have the ability to locate, then to cut. It has to undo the untangling step, and then the reconnection, which we call ligation. Just 4 things. And so how's this a problem for evolution? Well, the easy one is if it cuts, if the DNA gets cut, but you never untangle, that's bad. If it gets cut and you never reconnect, that's going to be really bad. It's just going to go everywhere there's a knot and it's going to chop it. So then you just have, small pieces of spaghetti lying around in the cell. And the way a lot of cancer chemotherapies work is it disrupts the ability for topoisomerase to do the reconnection. So this is a situation, if you don't have all of those capabilities in place at the same time, it's dead. When something's dead, it's not going to evolve anymore. Brain dead, stupid Darwinian processes will actually cease. And that's why it's a problem for evolution. It's that simple. And no one has been able to challenge that, except by saying, oh, that's not an evolution problem. That's an origin of life problem.
They typically do that. Whenever we get down to these small scale molecular biological functions that are obviously some form of a chicken and egg, or all the functions of it are necessary, otherwise the thing can't live, they go, well, that's just an origin of life type thing.
Exactly. And of course, the origin of life guys never solve it either. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. This is all I had. Maybe we'll rehearse again and do a better job next time. I'll do a better job.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, that pile's getting pretty big. What is an evolution problem?
Exactly. So that's all I had. Thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to end the recording. Anthony, I'll see you backstage. God bless.